Testing. Is that on? Okay, cool. All right. Good morning. Glad you're here. I want to say a special thank you to Jason for nearly teaching class today, and then at the last minute. Here's what happened. Is I called him on Thursday. Rebecca and I were planning on going out of town this weekend to visit some friends who just had their first baby and try to do all the house chores and stuff for them over the weekend. And Rebecca started feeling not very well. So I called Jason on Thursday morning and I said, hey, I think I'm going to be there on Sunday. Do you still want to teach? I don't want to make it awkward if I'm sitting in class while you're teaching. So we talked it through and he said, why don't you just go ahead and teach? But thanks, Jason. I really appreciate you being willing to step up and do that. Today, what I want to do is kind of do, again, just kind of a wrap up. I know we kind of spent a few minutes at the end of class last week trying to kind of come up with some takeaways and some things that we thought that was meaningful from this class. And I just want to kind of extend that and continue that conversation a little bit. But the first thing I want to do is I want to ask you to think about how you spend your time. And I'm going to give you just a second to think about that because it's a pretty broad question. You could answer that in 1,000 different ways probably. So think about that for just a second. But how do you spend your time? Okay. Anybody brave enough this morning? First thing right off the bat, it's early, we're still waking up, coffee hasn't kicked in yet. Anybody brave enough to venture? What is at least one of the things that you do? How do you spend your time?
I spend too much time watching YouTube.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, YouTube. Anybody in here a fan of the show The Office? A few. There's a clip where Steve Carell's character says, I didn't work for 5 days straight when I discovered YouTube. Yeah, okay, good. Watching YouTube clips, awesome. Anybody else? What else?
I work a lot.
Yeah. Sucking up to the boss. But that's, I mean, honestly, probably most of us can say, yeah, we spend a lot of time, a lot of our days working. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Yeah, just filling up the...
Work or what are the kids going to be doing and what's Brenda doing, what am I supposed to be doing?
Yep.
Real busy.
Yeah, absolutely. We all have our own schedule, right? So if you're in a family with multiple people like you guys are, everybody's got, what are you doing from 7 a.m. until whatever bedtime is for everybody, you know? And so everybody's got to fill up that calendar with some kind of engagement. I have a friend back in Dallas who he got married to his wife. They both had kids from previous relationships, and so there's 5 kids, and all 5 kids are either 18 or 16. And so he's like, I'm just a taxi service now. I just drive my kids from one thing to the next all day long. So absolutely, yeah, just that busyness of going from one thing to the next. What else? Okay, I think it's a good question for us to think about in a spiritual context because time is one of the ways that the Jewish people kind of express themselves differently from the world around them. So if we think back all the way to creation, the Jewish people had this thing called Sabbath. I think we're probably all familiar with Sabbath, right? But they had this thing called Sabbath, and it was something that made them different. It made them distinctive from everybody else around them. And in fact, by the time we get to Jesus, we find that this is one of the ways that they organize themselves, they organize their lives, and the Pharisees are famous in the Gospels for having come up with all of these boundaries so as not to break the commandment of keeping the Sabbath day holy. And so there was all these different rules and regulations. You know, I read one time that they had this rule where you couldn't travel farther than a certain distance away from your possessions. And so what they would do is they would take like a shoe or something like that, and they would just throw it, and then they could at least walk to where their shoe was. And that was one of the ways that they kind of got around this rule that they had built around making sure that they keep the Sabbath day holy, right? And so, but this was a distinctive marker. This was how they organized their time. I remember a couple years ago, I'm still one of those people that writes I have a paper planner calendar. I don't do it on my phone with the calendar app. I do it on a paper. And so I ordered a new one for 2020. I should have known right then and there that 2020 was going to be a really difficult year because this calendar came in, and instead of it being the calendar that I was used to, it was a Monday through Sunday calendar. Anybody ever accidentally stumbled across one of those? And the whole year, I was discombobulated because I was like, this calendar is trying to get me to organize my life Monday through Sunday instead of Sunday through Saturday. And so I just had this moment of every time I went to look at that calendar, I was like, I got to get my bearings again because it starts with Monday instead of on Sunday. But I think it's important for us to think about how we organize our time, how we orient ourselves around our time, and thinking about how Jesus did this in the Gospels and how it can be of use to us. And so I remember a couple of passages that I want to share with us this morning. One of the ones that I want to share this morning is from Mark chapter 13, and we'll get there in just a second, Cody. Yeah, you can go ahead and put it up. But basically, near the end of Jesus' ministry, this is right before he gets to the cross, he's reminding his followers about this kind of idea, about what to do about their time. And in this passage, there's two things that I want us to pay special attention to, one of which is the urgency that Jesus communicates in this passage. And then the second thing that I want us to think about is the patience with which he communicates that urgency. Because these seem like they're two opposite things. Urgency and patience, they don't seem like they are the same thing, but Jesus communicates both, I think, in this passage. And I think it's a good way for us to think about as we're kind of closing out this series on evangelism. We want to be patient and yet urgent at the same time. And so I want us to read this passage together and then get your reactions to it, see if you agree with that, see if there's anything else that you notice in this passage that would be useful for us in this conversation. But let's read this together. Mark 13, starting in verse 32. About that day or hour no one knows, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, be alert. You do not know when that time will come. It's like a man going away. He leaves his house and puts his servants in charge, each with their assigned task, and tells the one at the door to keep watch. Therefore keep watch, because you do not know when the owner of the house will come back, whether in the evening or at midnight or when the rooster crows or at dawn. If he comes suddenly, do not let him find you sleeping. What I say to you, I say to everyone, watch. Okay. My idea here is that he's communicating patience and urgency to his disciples about when he will return. So somebody react to this. Do you see that? Do you agree with that? Do you see something else at work that we also need to make note of? React to this passage. React to what Jesus is talking about here.
Well, in today's world, if you're waiting on something, if you have family that's coming to town, or if you have a business meeting at the office or whatever, you've pre-prepared and you're ready, and that's like one of the most important things on your list is just everything in your life you're organizing around that event that you're ready to come.
Yeah.
And I think that's what he's encouraging us to do, is that we don't know when he will return, and our whole life should be focused on having our lives being ready for him to return.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody ever had a meeting on the calendar, and you get together with one of your coworkers who's also going to be in that meeting, and you have a pre-meeting for the meeting? I almost every meeting that I go into these days, I feel like I'm going to have like at least a pre-conversation. It might not be a full-blown meeting, but a pre-conversation to kind of get ready for that, whatever's coming up. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yeah, Will.
I'm remembering things of gravity in my life, both good and bad. My grandmother and my father were terminally ill, so we knew for a while their passing was going to come.
Yeah.
But we didn't know when. And when, career-wise, I had about a decade of highly organized engineering career, and then the first daughter, Sierra, was expecting, and had no idea when she was going to come, but, Brenda was expecting our first daughter, Sierra. Both sad and exciting things, I think of when I read this passage of things that are totally out of my control that I know are going to happen.
Yeah, that's right. I like that, because it makes it more real to us. I think if we can put it in the context of, like expecting a child or one of those major life events where you're not sure exactly what time. I mean, you have a general idea maybe, but not a specific time. So I like that of helping make it more concrete to us. Somebody else, anybody else, anything from this passage you find worthwhile in this conversation?
Well, I think it's kind of saying hold on to your North Star and don't get caught up so much in the details that you forget about it, right?
Yeah.
Like, obviously, he's not expecting them to stay awake for hours and hours. It's a bit more metaphorical, but I just think about sometimes you get so caught up in the process of the details of something you forget what you were actually doing in the first place.
Yeah.
So it's just telling them to remain diligent and remember, despite all the distractions and the nuances, that there's an end state and to be ready for it.
Yeah. Somebody help me out. I think it's 2 Thessalonians. Tell me if I'm wrong. It might be 1 Thessalonians. But there's this passage where Paul's talking about not being idle. And basically what it seems like is happening is that the Thessalonians, they have this expectation that Jesus is going to return. And they think it's imminent. They think it's like any minute now. And so they've kind of given up on doing their day-to-day stuff. And they're just kind of sitting on the side of the road, just kind of like, all right, we're ready, anytime now. And I think it might be 1 Thessalonians. I can't remember, but Paul, is it second? Okay. See, always go with your instinct. Always go with your gut. But Paul's basically like, no, like you still need to continue to live. You still need to continue to function. You need to be able to do the things that are expected of you from your community. God is expecting you to participate in doing things as well. You don't just sit by idly and wait. You still act. You still live. So this idea of patient but urgent and always being ready, not necessarily taking it literally. Okay, I have to stay awake for the rest of my life, but being ready. Yeah, Jason.
I think there's a very positive perspective on this too. It's like he's reminding us, hey, have a sense of expectation and anticipation. I think there's something in the human nature that it's good to have something to look forward to. We love looking at that vacation on the calendar, or that opportunity to go do something we want to do, and kind of goes along with set your minds on heaven where Christ is in that scripture, and so I think he's very positive.
Yeah. Wednesday night, Chris Seidman was here, and he was talking about so often there's a couple places in the New Testament where we're challenged to live with both grace and truth. And so he was talking about those two things and how, especially in today's world, those are hard to do at the same time. We tend to either fall on one side of the spectrum or the other. And we don't do a very good job of holding those ideas in tension. And that's what I want to do this morning with these two ideas of urgency and patience, is I want us to try to figure out a way to hold those in tension together. To not be so totally committed to one that we ignore the other, or vice versa, but to find a way to hold those two things together. And so I was thinking about this, and I got some help from a book. I'm a nerd, so I get a lot of help from books. I like to read. But I found this idea of ways of viewing time, and I thought it was really useful. This is probably not all that there could be said about these ideas. There's probably more to this list, but this book came up with 5 different ways of viewing our time in the world today. And so I want to show those to you, and then I want us to kind of have a chance to think about those together. So the first one I think will probably resonate with a lot of us. But the first one is that time is scarce. And so the way that we think about this is it's an event-oriented. This is kind of what we were talking about at the beginning of class when we said, how do you use your time? I've got a calendar, I've got a schedule, I've got these things that I like to do. I like to watch YouTube, and I do it at this time of day, kind of thing. But this idea that time is scarce. And so, in our culture, the way of thinking about this is that time is money, right? It's a limited quantity resource, and we've got to parse it out and use it in a correct and wise way. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, but it's just not the only way of viewing time. And so there's other ways as well. Kind of the opposite of that one is that time is abundant. And this is more of a relationally oriented way of viewing time. And I get in trouble for this a lot because when I'm in a conversation with somebody, I like to be, as much as I'm able, fully present and try to avoid distractions. And to me, the biggest distraction in the world is this thing right here. And so if I get a phone call and I'm in the middle of a conversation with you, chances are I'm going to pretend like I don't even understand or feel that my phone is vibrating or ringing in my pocket because I want to be present to you. I get in trouble with that a lot because Rebecca will call me, and then she'll call me again, and then she'll call me again, and I'm still not answering the phone, and she's like, what is wrong with you? I've called you multiple times. Clearly this is important. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to talk to somebody. She's like, I'm more important than they are. But this is one of those ways of viewing time, that time is abundant. And so this is certainly something, we hear stories about church services in other parts of the world that they don't necessarily have a start and end time. They just kind of have a time that people start showing up, and then you just kind of continue and go, and then eventually everybody shows up, and then eventually it's done, and there's not really a time that you finish. And I know for some of us that's like mortifying, and for others of us it's like, we should do that. Like, that'd be amazing, And so it's kind of just, again, it's a different way of viewing time and thinking about time. Another way that we can think about this is that time is ending. And we certainly see this in the New Testament a lot. There's this expectation that Jesus is returning and that time will come to an end. And so this is kind of an eschatological view of the world. Eschatology is just kind of the thought, the thinking about end times. And so, I think of the song that plays in the movie. What is the movie? But the song is "It's the End of the World as We Know It." What is the movie? Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Anybody? I'm the only one. Yeah. Just me. But anyways, there's that song. It's the end of the world as we know it. And there's Cody's dying back there. I'm on an island up here, man. It's just me. But yeah, there's this idea that, okay, time is coming to an end, and so there's the culmination of all of time, and we're about to reach it, and so how do we live in light of the fact that time is ending, right? And so that's a way to view the world, that's a way to organize your time. Another one is that time is advancing, and so this would be, anybody in here heard of the myth of progress? The myth of progress is basically that we're always getting better, we're always advancing, we're always going, the world is getting better. And the best argument against this is the 20th century, because it was the deadliest, ugliest, war-torn century in history. And so this idea that we're always advancing and progressing, it's like, okay, maybe in some ways, but in other ways, like, we're still just the same as we are, and we're getting deadlier and deadlier means of participating in warfare and things like that. But this is a way of thinking about the world. This is a way of organizing our time, that time is advancing. We're moving somewhere. We're progressing towards something and away from something else. And then another one is time is recurring. And so this one is kind of thinking of time in a cyclical manner, that there's that quote that those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it, right? And so that's kind of this idea, that time is cyclical. And so what goes around comes around. It's going to happen again. Everything kind of goes in a loop, and we're on a recurring way of viewing the world. And so this is 5 ways of thinking about time, 5 ways of viewing time. Probably, if I had to guess, we hop in and out of different ones of these at different times. We might be more inclined towards 1 or 2 of them, but chances are, depending on what the circumstances are, we probably move around a little bit and operate differently depending on what's going on in our world. But somebody want to respond to these? Does this make sense to you? Do you automatically, off the top of your head, have a 6th one that we could think about? What do you think about these ways of viewing and understanding time?
I didn't realize, but I mean, like you said, I hop between all of these. I wouldn't have ever seen them out like this before. And it's kind of, in your mind, difficult to like wrap your head around all of the different types because you move around in them so much. And if you're in one, your goals would be different. So if you hop to the next one, then your goals change a little bit more. So I would say it seems a little overwhelming to balance what is the right goal for all of these different time
Yeah.
views.
Yeah. Well, I think, and that kind of is a perfect comment, because I think that when we think about our time this way, it can be really useful to us to understand, okay, how are we living? What are our goals for if we're living in a time of scarce mentality, okay, what is my goal with that? How do I live the best way in that view of time that I can? But I think it's also useful to think about, okay, if I'm in a conversation with somebody, a spiritual conversation with somebody else, and I'm living in a time of scarce mentality, and they're living in as a time is abundant mentality, we're probably not going to communicate very well together. Like, one of us is going to have to make an adjustment. And so if we're thinking about it in terms of evangelism and telling the story of Jesus, this is probably also really useful for us to think about in terms of, okay, who is the person I'm speaking with, and how can I communicate to them not only in a way that they'll understand it, but also understanding how they're understanding the world and this frame of reference with time. Are they thinking that time is ending? Because if they are, then I need to up the level of urgency because they think the world is about to end, right? Do I think the world is about to end and they don't? Well, I might need to up the patience a little bit for them so that I can kind of communicate with them in a more effective way. So anyways, yeah, thank you, Katie. I think that's great. Anybody else?
Well, and I was thinking a lot about our own children, the time that they will be, between 10 and 20 is going to end. And so to me, it's very scarce. And from their perspective, their whole life's abundant. And there's going to be a season when they make a lot of life decisions. And statistically, a lot of those happen from 20 to 30.
Yeah.
And or 18, whenever they launch. And so even in discipling them, even that one relationship, I can see it bouncing all around me because I've got one perspective, and then Sierra has a totally different.
Yeah, the jars of pennies. If you've given birth in this church, you get a jar of pennies, and each penny is it a week? Each penny is a week in your child's life, and there's all kinds of different versions of this. I've seen it with marbles. I've seen it any number of ways, but basically each item in the jar represents 1 week that you have with your child, and so the older they get, you start removing more and more of those items from the jar, and it starts shrinking. And so, yeah, you do kind of get that thought of, okay, my time is scarce with them. I only have a certain number of pennies in the jar left to try to instill in them wisdom, faith, all of these different things. And so the same is true even with somebody that we're having a spiritual conversation with as well, that, okay, how do I organize my conversation in light of what I understand our time together to be, and how are they understanding it too, so that I can communicate to them effectively? Yeah. Good.
I thought of one more that you probably don't want to be in this heavy topic, but I thought about Ecclesiastes, and I would title it "Time is Meaningless."
Yeah.
Basically, it doesn't matter what I do, life will pass me by, and nobody will ever remember me.
Yeah.
Or, my actions don't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's sometimes easy to fall into that trap.
Yeah, absolutely. And understanding that too can be useful, I think, for this type of conversation. Because I think in our world today, we probably encounter more people who don't have faith, who have the perspective of Ecclesiastes, especially when it comes to thinking about matters of spirituality. Like, it's just all meaningless. Like, we're just here and then we're gone. It's like, okay, well, that's actually a very biblical idea. Like, I know you're an atheist, but like, you're communicating Scripture. And so, yeah, I think that's a great one. I appreciate that. And in some ways, I was trying to last week during my sermon, I was trying to communicate that as well, that the kingdom of God just keeps going. And so if we participate in it or not, it's going to continue. It's not going to fail because we're there or because we're not there. But we have the opportunity to be blessed by it if we jump in and join it. So yeah, wonderful. Time is meaningless. I'm going to add that to the notes here. Anybody else? Okay. This is a little bit out of context, but go with me for a second. So Galatians chapter 5, towards the end of the chapter, you get into the fruits of the Spirit. You may remember that. So as Paul's writing this book, he's writing in Galatians chapter 5, and he starts talking about, hey, don't do these kinds of things. Kind of like what we were talking about last week with the book of Ephesians. You have this list of don'ts, and then you have this list of do's. And so he's kind of going into that in the book of Galatians. And he concludes that section of chapter 5 by saying, since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. And so he's not really talking about, it's a little bit out of context for our purposes, because he's not really talking about evangelism, but I think it's a perfect application for what we're talking about here as well. If we think of how we view time and how we understand time and how others understand time, ultimately what we want to do is we want to live in step with the Spirit. And so what we're doing is we're inviting with our time, whatever mentality we happen to have at the moment, if it's shifting and changing, or if it's this in one context and a different one in another context, what we want to do, no matter what, is to be in step with the Spirit and to live by what the Spirit is leading us to do. And so as we kind of conclude this topic and this conversation together on evangelism, what I want us to do is, moving forward, I want us to continue to be in step with the Spirit, to live with the Spirit, and to allow the Spirit to guide us in these conversations that we may or may not have with our coworkers, our neighbors, our family members, our children, whoever it is, whoever we're challenging ourselves to have faith conversations with. We should do it by keeping in step with the Spirit. Not too much of a stretch, right? I know it's a little out of context, but I think it still applies. Okay, so here's what I want to do. Here we got about 10 minutes left before we're done with class. Josh, he's not here this week, but last week, one of the things that he said that he wished that we would have done is that we would have almost written down an action plan for, okay, who am I going to talk to? What do I need to prepare myself in order to have that conversation with this person? And so what I want to do is I want to pass out a note card and some pens, and I want to give you a chance to write an action plan. This is just for you. You can share it with somebody if you want to. You don't have to share it with anybody if you don't want to. So don't, this is not one of those things that we're all going to be looking at your answers and saying, oh, well, you could be doing more, or, oh, wow, you're really ambitious. It's not going to be anything like that. This is just for you. So it's going to be an opportunity to just kind of write out an action plan and say, okay, how am I going to put this into practice? How am I going to try to do this moving ahead? So I've got a couple of questions that might be prompters. If you're thinking, okay, what am I going to do here? Here's some maybe prompts that you can go. There might be other questions that you want to answer and jot down on your note card. But I'm going to give you a few minutes to do this, and then we'll reconvene here at the end with a couple more comments and thoughts. I probably passed out too many there. I'd rather you have more than not enough. And here's pens. Oh, thanks. Okay. I'm just going to give you a handful, and hopefully that'll be hopefully that'll be enough. I can come back and get more if I need to. Okay. Anybody got extras that they need me to pick up? Okay. Did y'all get no cards over here? There we go.
Hey, I've seen hitchhikers.
Do what? Oh, okay, good. Yeah. I'm not alone. Good. Love it. Okay, take a couple minutes. Think about these questions. Maybe other questions as well. The pen has to come with it, apparently. I'm kind of writing out action plans here. Awesome. So there's a prompt. All right, feel free to continue writing. I want to just kind of wrap up with a couple comments and offer you guys a chance to share any more comments that you have as well in the next few minutes here. But one of the things that I said a couple weeks ago was that the end of evangelism is not baptism. The end of evangelism is discipleship. And one aspect of discipleship is evangelism. And so kind of going back to our ways of viewing time, this is kind of one of those time is recurring kinds of things, because as disciples, we're tasked, we're given commands from Jesus to go into all the world and preach the good news, to evangelize, to teach about who Jesus is, to invite others into that life, to come and be baptized. And so when we participate in evangelism, we're following the commands of Jesus, we're living as his disciples, and then our evangelism is inviting others to come and do the same. And so it's kind of one of those cyclical, recurring moments where we start with evangelism, we move to discipleship, we move back into evangelism, back into discipleship, and it's just kind of this back and forth movement that we continue to have. So as we finish class, I want to encourage you, and hopefully that these plans are something that you can take with you. If you don't have a finished plan today, that's fine. I want you to continue to think about it. And next week, I'm going to be rotating to a different class. Craig is going to be coming in here and teaching starting next week, and a totally different topic. But I want to encourage this idea to continue. I don't want you to just kind of, okay, well, that was a good class. We're moving on to the next class. Now, I want us to continue to think about this and continue to kind of work through these plans that we have, thinking about, okay, who is God calling me to have conversations with? Maybe it's one person, maybe it's a couple of different people, and what's the best way that I can go about doing that? How can I communicate effectively to them what the gospel is, and in a way that matters for their life, so they understand that Jesus is not just this guy who lived once, but he's somebody that actually still lives in us today, and he wants the best kind of life that we can have in the world, the life that God created us to have. Okay. Final comments from anybody in here. I've got one kind of sending scripture I want to read over us as we go, but if anybody has a final comment or question or idea that they want to share, please do. Yeah, go ahead, David.
First of all, thanks for taking this topic on. Kind of my question is, I have highly appreciated how your class is at a very individual level.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to convict each of us individually that our lives need to be focused around this paradigm of evangelism.
Yeah.
My question to you is, are there any plans at this church to organize more strongly into some, more deliberate focus on evangelism?
Yeah, more of a program-based, kind of a church-wide emphasis, rather than just in your own personal life. I've run across a couple of different programs that I've been impressed by, that I've seen other churches do. One of them is called Alpha Course. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that. It's not a Church of Christ ministry, but I think we could adapt it pretty easily for our purposes. But basically, it's teaching what are the basics of the Christian faith. And so you hold this course and you invite others to come. And so you could, the church could encourage people from the community to come. You could invite members of from your networks to come, and it's just kind of an opportunity to say, hey, you may or may not be familiar with Christianity, but let's just kind of take it to the very basics, and let's just say, what is it? What is this faith really? Because there's examples, both good and bad, all around us. And so, somebody that might claim to be a Christian may or may not believe exactly what we think the fundamentals of faith are. So there's things like that I think we could definitely look into. And so I think there's definitely opportunity. We just need to kind of grab the bull by the horns and go for it. Did I say that right? Grab the bull. Yeah, I said that right. Okay. I should never say sayings off the spur of the moment, because I always get them backwards. I'm always nervous about that. But yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, I think that's something we should definitely think about. And that's not the only program. There's other programs out there as well.
Well, we have so much. I mean, I'll go back. I think of the clothing room that we have, and 40 families every Monday come, that are from out in the community, and it's like we have people coming to us, and and just to have a specific path towards getting to know that family, or maybe what their spiritual needs are, or the children's place. We have 100+ kids in the children's place, and just families from the community dropping their kids off. And how do we reach out
Yeah.
you know, and make sure they have the gospel of Jesus.
Yeah.
in there.
Yeah. And let me just share one positive about that, just because Jamie's going to Children's Place for the first time this year, and so we're brand new to it. I know some of you are veterans, have been there, done that. But I was talking with Alexandria about this a couple weeks ago, and I think it's been a really great summer for her to come on board full time. And she is in conversations with Kristen about ways that she can be involved at Children's Place, and so they're looking at doing starting out with 1 day a week where Kristen will be here the entire day, and classes will come to Alexandria, and she'll get to basically do like a children's church with them, and get to so they'll kind of have a little bit more of an intentional connecting the kids with the church, but also B, like, hey, let's make sure that we're telling them stories about Jesus. We're having opportunities where they can learn about faith, and they've got things already in the curriculum that do that. But it's just kind of, again, what's that next little step that we can take with these different programs and these different things? I think that's great.
She's also doing that with mocks.
Oh, good.
We have 115 kids that are coming
Great.
to mocks, and
Yeah.
a lot of them are not from this church.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot are Christian, but a lot are not, so.
Yeah. Awesome. Fantastic. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, let me read over you a scripture. I know the bell just went off, so we need to, those who have kids need to go pick up. But let me read this. This is Proverbs chapter 3, verses 3 through 6. And if you remember the book of Proverbs, the context is that it's as if a parent is writing to a son. Hey, this is how I want you to live. This is what true wisdom looks like in your life. This is what you need to learn for your daily life. And I love these words. These are very famous words from the book of Proverbs, but I think they're great sending words for us in this class. And so let me read these over us as we go. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. Then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. So as we go from here, take those words with you. I think that's a good calling for us to live as God's people in the world. So let's get to it, I guess. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you down the hall.